Hi, welcome back to my YouTube space. My name is Kacha, as always, and today I'm going to be talking about a book that I just read. It's called How to Be Right by James O'Brien. James O'Brien, I believe, is a talk show host, but a radio talk show host, and it's really interesting how I actually got this book. At work, we always have very interesting conversations at work. We were having a conversation about something and I just was like, I'm not even gonna engage. Count me out. I was like, peace, bye, I'm out. My colleague then mentioned actually that, oh yeah, actually he knows of a book called Why I No Longer Talk to White People About Race. It's a really popular book, especially in this climate. So yeah, I was just like, I don't get involved. I don't talk to men about feminism or gender equality. I just like, So yeah, that's where this book recommendation came out of, and it was like, yeah, there's a book actually that talks about things like that, having difficult conversations with people, or conversations where you sort of probe people to actually get to the bottom of what they're actually talking about. Because sometimes, so many times, people have all these opinions about things, and when you open and you peel the layers, there's nothing inside. You're just talking. So that's what this book is all about. I'm not really going to go into too much detail about the book, to be honest. But it is similar in terms of, well, it's going to be a bit of an insult to compare this to a Kala's book, but it's the format in terms of the contents. I don't read a lot, so like this is new for me, seeing like a book with a lot of content, or like a contents page. And I should say as well, I generally prefer books about like storytelling and stories, because that's what appeals to me the most. But I do understand that it is important to read books like these because you get to learn a lot as well. So yeah, going through the contents page really quickly. Chapter 1 is on Islam and Islamism. Chapter 2 is on Brexit. Chapter 3 is on LGBT. Chapter 4 is on political correctness. Chapter 5 is on feminism. Chapter 6 is on nanny states and classic liberals. Chapter 7 is on the age gap, and chapter 8, which is the final chapter, is on Trump. Oof. That's a few rough things to talk about there. Yeah, I cannot do any of these conversations here, but I just found the book really interesting, and I found the pattern quite interesting as well. So like, say for example, here is you can see the dialogue here. So this is a conversation that he was having with someone, and whenever he would include a conversation or a dialogue, he would put it in that sort of format. The first thing that I read in the book that actually really just got me just dying is a conversation he was having with someone who was it's like one of those people who are like,
you can't see anything anymore these days because people are so easily offended.
And so he goes on about a conversation that he had with someone, and I'm just going to read it quickly because it was one of my favorite things from the book. He says, 3 or 4 years after I first assumed the position behind the microphone, I was told by a caller from the London borough of Hounslow that he wasn't allowed to say what he really thought about immigration because of political correctness. I remember it partly because I lived in the same borough in London at the time, and partly because what followed provided one of those moments where even the presenter is left spluttering in shock at what just emerged from the radio. So this is someone who's complaining obviously about political correctness, and then the author James goes, go on, say what you really think about immigration, John. I promise not to call you racist or cut you off for being politically incorrect. Just take a deep breath and say it. There was a pause, James said, an audible inhalation of breath, and then the guy goes, all right, Hounslow is full of Pakistanis and they all stink. And then so he goes, can you debate with John, and how would you actually challenge that kind of conversation? But then his comeback after that was so interesting, and I'm sure he probably would have been laughing at this. So he goes, the author James goes, what do they smell of, John? And then John goes, curry. And James goes, all of them, John? And then John goes, yes. And then James goes, do you like curry, John? And it's just so funny, but this is like maybe a more maybe a more funny one, but like there's just so many of these conversations, and people just like, how can you even, what does that have to do with there's so many situations like this in this book where he has a conversation with someone really feels so strongly about something, and there's silly things that they feel strongly about. Let's even start there. Feel so strongly about something incredibly silly, and then you probe the person, ask a few questions. Okay, why do you think this? Why do you do this? Or how do you? And literally after 2 or 3 questions, you just realize that the person, even the person themselves, they just look stupid, to be honest. So for example, one of them on the chapter about Islam and Islamism, this guy says about how lots of immigration of Muslims in the UK is changing, like the country is no longer a Christian country, and he was going on about how they're trying to change the religion of the country or something stupid like that. And then the author James goes, okay, do you go to church? And then the person goes, no, I don't. And then you just think of this kind of stuff and you're just like, why? There's another part of the book as well that I really do like, in the chapter about age gap, and I think it's quite an important conversation to have, and I think he was having it with an older person. So in the world at the moment, I think in quite a lot of westernized countries, where a lot of older generation, boomers if you want to call them that, would say like, oh, millennials or like Gen Z, they can't afford housing because they buy too much avocados. So you have some like a really similar conversation with someone who is a bit older about that, where the person thinks that, oh, maybe they should like manage their money a bit more, then they might finally be able to afford some property. Then he just really highlights like the fact that, say for example now, most people back in the day, as they always say, they only had to spend like what, 7 grand or so, or 10 grand on their property, and then when you do try and mention that, they will say something like, oh well, I wasn't earning a lot of money then. But then when you look at the ratio, it's just insane. So for example, here right now, I think the average salary in the country is about £27,000, whereas the average house price in London, for example, is around £300,000. So when you look at the ratio, it's like, it's so dead obvious. But then you have a lot of people who, you know, would disagree on that strongly, and then when you bring those kind of facts and ask those kind of questions, then but then even the person he was having the conversation with in the book actually refused to agree. She was like, well, they just need to manage their money more. Even the section on Donald Trump actually was quite interesting. I think there was a time when Donald Trump was coming to the UK and people were going to do some, like, have a massive balloon that was like a caricature of him float around somewhere in the air, and people were like calling in and strongly defending this man, and you're just like, does he give you money though? Does he pay your bills? So yeah, it was really exposing in so many ways. I'm not surprised by a lot of the things, but still you'd be so surprised how these people actually ring in to the radio and you're just like, then swear for you. Are you alright? Is everything okay? So yeah, it's not surprising, but I think it's really important that he's showcasing, I think is quite a good one to say, showcasing these people's thoughts. There's so many people, and I'm sure he had to troll through so many of these kind of conversations, which is quite sad really, that you have people that think like this, but it is the world that we live in and it is what it is. I find it a little bit repetitive in terms of with all the conversations, because these are things that we already know. So I think it's good that we have someone who is a white male in the UK who thinks like this. I think that's quite good to see. It's quite promising that he actually challenges people and asks people these questions that I think they're really important to ask people about. But I think the one thing that the book actually really did teach me was that to try and, you know, ask people these questions, and you can see the pattern, even though it is repetitive in that way, you can see the pattern that he actually uses to ask people these questions, and you can adopt some of those if you're about that life. I'm just like, don't get me involved. But yeah, and it also helped me as well in a way to see that like the media just pushes fear onto people, and there's so many critical things where it's like they just post a headline, but a lot of the time they're just trying to push fear and an agenda on people. But whereas when you actually deep look at the thing that people are saying, well, this is now an issue, so many times it's just, you know, it's not, there's nothing there, and people just get really fussy or worried about things that just don't really, just not really an issue, to be honest. So yeah, it's a simple book, I think, quite an easy read. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you somewhere in this space sometime soon.